how can early stage founders sell with confidence, even if they're not salespeople, you know?
So the first thing you have to understand is sales is a learnable skill, right? And by the way, I'm a perfect example of that, right? So I grew up in a household of academics. Both my parents were professors. So our conversations around the dinner table were about history and politics and culture. It never touched commercial stuff ever. In fact, when somebody would cold call our house, my mom would normally pick up the phone and pretend she was the maid and then tell the person on the other line that, oh, the Vardy family had moved to Europe and not bother calling back. So, I mean, that's the kind of environment in which I kind of developed my skills and became ultimately somebody who sold over $2 billion worth of deals. And I talk about that, by the way, in my book, right? The Launch Code, which has just come out recently, is that underlying everything I talk about is that it is a learnable skill.
Welcome to the EU Startups Podcast. Sit back and enjoy the show hosted by Marcin Lewandowski.
Hey everyone, this is Marcin Lewandowski and you're listening to the EU Startups Podcast. From closing $2 billion in deals to mentoring hundreds of startups, Zoltan Vardy is here to turn your sales chaos into a repeatable revenue engine. Let's decode the launch code together. It's fast, it's hands-on, no fluff. Zoltan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Marcin. It's fantastic to be here, especially after a wonderful EU Startup Summit, where a lot of great founders were there to learn about sales, and glad I can continue the conversation here online.
Yeah, amazing. It was such a pleasure to meet you there. Same here. I'm excited to continue the conversation here. So Zoltan, let's be real. Why do so many startup founders overcomplicate sales?
Well, I think there's some of it is based on mindset or kind of how they approach selling. Some of it's very practical. So, there's a lot of founders that I come across, especially ones with sort of a technical or product focus, that are a bit afraid of sales, right? They feel like it's about pushing something on people that they don't really need or want, instead of recognizing it as a process whereby you help somebody solve an important problem. And sort of that mindset, I think, can be quite limiting if that's how you perceive sales. Alternatively, I also think that there's some structural things, right? So they confuse activity with progress, right? So chasing every lead instead of kind of focusing on one type of ideal customer and following a framework that leads to kind of consistent structured approach to your ideal customer. And I think the combination of those two is what makes sales unnecessarily overcomplicated for a lot of startup founders.
Amazing. I love the answer. I love how you actually answer the questions. Like, I know it already from Malta. It's like so insightful, but crisp at the same time. You have like ICPs, value props, funnels. What's actually the minimum viable setup a startup needs to start closing deals?
Well, I'd focus on kind of three things to start if I were starting from scratch. First thing I would do is become very clear on who my ideal customer is. So I mentioned that earlier, your ICP, right? Your ideal customer profile. That's so critical because it gives you the focus you need and points you in the right direction. Now, of course, that doesn't happen overnight, right? So it's a process of trial and error. That's what I call the pain of sales, right? Like that iterative process where you find the solution and the direction you need to go. Once you've got your ICP, very close behind that is articulating a very clear value proposition, right? So a sentence that explains in very simple terms what problem you solve, who you solve it for, and why you're better than the competition, right? So that in itself captures the essence of what you're offering. And then finally, it's putting your nose to the grindstone, as they say, and just focusing primarily to start on outbound sales, right? So looking at your ICP or your value proposition, building a list of 50 to 100 companies that match your ideal customer, and then reaching out to them through coordinated process. In most cases, looking for what I would call touch points, right? So referrals, references, some sort of connection that gets you in their comfort zone for a first conversation, and just following a very simple kind of three-step process, right? Outreach, meeting, proposal. And the more you do that, the more systematic you become. What you'll find is that you start getting more and more clear on what's working and what's not. And so that gives you the basis for then scaling your sales processes in the future.
Amazing. And what would you say, how can early stage founders sell with confidence, even if they're not salespeople,
Yeah. Well,
I know that kind of every CEO has to have this kind of sales magic in him or in her. But yeah, I think not a lot of people. It's not like they're not born with it. It's not supernatural.
Yeah.
How should we do it?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, right? So the first thing you have to understand is sales is a learnable skill, right? It's not a magic wand that you wave and all of a sudden everything works. Of course, there are people who are slightly more outgoing or maybe have an affinity for sales, but it's definitely a learnable skill. And by the way, I'm a perfect example of that, right? So I grew up in a household of academics. Both my parents were professors, so our conversations around the dinner table were about history and politics and culture. Never touched commercial stuff. Ever. In fact, when somebody would cold call our house, my mom would normally pick up the phone and pretend she was the maid, and then tell the person on the other line that, oh, the Vardy family had moved to Europe, and not bother calling back. So, I mean, that's the kind of environment in which I kind of developed my skills and became ultimately somebody who sold over $2 billion worth of deals. And I talk about that, by the way, in my book, right? The Launch Code, which has just come out recently, is that underlying everything I talk about is that it is a learnable skill. Now, once you accept that and you follow the process of focus, of solving a problem, of following through, what happens is you start getting some success, some quick wins, and that builds confidence, right? So there's kind of a direct relationship between understanding sales as learnable skill to doing the right things consistently over time, getting positive results, and then ultimately feeling like you can achieve great things. And a lot of the transformations that I notice in the customers I work with is quite amazing, right? I mean, I've one example I cite quite often is a company called Action Audit out of Poland. They basically sold a SaaS tool to industrial manufacturers that helped them audit the efficiency of their workflows. Alexander Nemchik, who was the founder, he was a guy that admittedly spent 5, maybe 10% of his time on selling. We did the Launch Code program together, and by the end, he was spending 60 to 65% of his time on sales, and the numbers speak for themselves. He went from 6 customers to 52 customers. He went from 2 markets to 13 markets, including the United States. So, it works. You just have to apply the system.
This is amazing. These are amazing numbers and results, Zoltan. I know you often say, focus is your fuel.
Yeah.
What should founders be laser focused on in early stage B2B sales?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, your goal is to achieve what's commonly known as product market fit, right? That's the point at which you've created a solution for a problem, and there's sort of a natural pull from the market for that relationship, that commercial relationship to happen, right? So that's the desired outcome. How you get there is by putting together the pieces, sort of like a puzzle, in a way that enables you to find product market fit, and that kind of comes back to some of the things I've said earlier: having an ideal customer, having a really clear value proposition, having a clear channel through which you acquire your customers. In the book, I talk about sort of 3 fundamental forms of channel acquisition, right? So one is outbound sales, where you are the one who's reaching out to potential customers. Then there's partnerships, where you're tapping into third parties, whether they're organizations or people, tapping into their credibility, tapping into their network, their reach, and using that as a way to acquire customers. Or third, getting companies to find you. So inbound marketing through events, through digital marketing. So one of those channels will likely be the right area of focus. And once you find those pieces, then you will see that pool that I just described happening, right? Sales cycles become shorter, deal sizes become bigger, and you just get that sense of traction, of momentum. And that comes with focus. Until you find that, it's a struggle, and that's the reality of the situation. But if you stick with it long enough, eventually you'll find it.
Yeah, Zoltan, give it to us straight. What's the biggest time waster in founder-led sales?
Well, I think it's pitching to unqualified leads, right? So it's that concept of I'm going to find somebody who'll listen to me. I'm going to tell them my story, and I'm going to hope that that it resonates. And by the way, that could be through kind of network-based sales, which is like a friend of a friend type of discussions, or even generic sort of outbound sales emails that you hope, I call it spray and pray, right? When you send out 10,000 emails and hope that somebody responds. Those are generally strategies that lead to a lot of unqualified conversations. If you accept the fact that sales is there's a direct connection between the targets you set and the actions you take, then you actually will find that you'll be wasting a lot less time. You'll be closing deals with less effort. That's kind of the core, and a couple of things that I think kind of maybe add to that more on a sort of an ancillary basis. Building fancy presentations investing into really heavy CRMs and technologies without really validating your basics of your offer first. That's also, I think, a waste of time and energy. I would do it the other way: validate first, and then start building the systems and the bells and whistles and the tools around that once you validated your offer.
Awesome. I was wondering, what's your favorite, like one sentence pitch formula for getting a foot in the door?
Well, I actually have one of the modules of the launch code is called value proposition. And value proposition for me is actually at the essence of selling, right? It's that one sentence that explains what problem you solve, who you solve it for, and why you're better than the competition. That to me is the one sentence pitch that you just described. And for that, I've got sort of a very clear sentence structure, which obviously visually will be more easy to understand, but I can talk you through it. It's like, what's the company name? Is how do you define your company? We help a certain type of target customer to achieve a benefit by doing something unique. That's our competitive advantage. And so if I kind of put that together, an example I cite in the book, a company called Povio, which is a software development firm out of Slovenia that I work with, we went through this 5-step process to arrive at this pitch. And it sounded like this: Povio is a software development firm that helps hardware manufacturers to accelerate stagnant software projects by augmenting internal teams with engineers who optimize their infrastructure and workflow. That in itself is just a very simple, basic sentence. It's not about being clever. It's about being clear. And if you follow that formula, you'll actually find that gets the conversation started much more quickly and efficiently than if you're just sitting there kind of talking for 5 minutes about random stuff.
I love it. Zoltan, how do you turn one happy B2B client into 10? Like, what's the actual playbook?
Well, look, I think with effort comes success, right? And so you start adding additional customers just through the concept of, going out there and talking to qualified leads. But of course, if you want to be practical about it, ask for referrals, right? So at the moment of the greatest satisfaction, like right after delivery, ask for referrals. Say, hey, are there any people in your network, any companies that you can introduce me to that you think would benefit from my solution? There's nothing wrong with asking. And you'll find actually that satisfied customers are extremely happy to do that, right? Because it also is an opportunity for them to do a favor for somebody in their network. Another thing you can do is to take certain relationships with customers, success stories, turn them into case studies, right? So you can use case studies to highlight some examples where you took a person from point A to point B by whatever solution you offered. And so, that can take the form of something, in a written form. I often use video testimonials where I have a founder who I work with talk for a couple of minutes about how they benefited from our cooperation. Those I think are really practical steps. Testimonial quotes, logos of companies that you've worked with. Make sure they're very clearly presented in your pitch decks and your website. So these are there to build credibility, and I think that's really an important point, right? So one of the biggest challenges for an early stage company is to build credibility, build trust, and the way that you do that is by clawing and scratching to get those first few clients, and then really selling that value to other customers. Because look, let's be honest, most business decision makers just feel better about saying yes when they see others in their general area of operations have said yes before them. It's just human nature.
Yeah, that's so true. Zoltan, you already mentioned, you spoke a bit about decks already. Let's talk sales decks. Most suck. What's one thing every founder should cut immediately from theirs?
Yeah. So one of the things I talk a lot about is the importance of customer focused communication. And what that means is that when you are pitching a company on your service, don't start with talking about yourself, right? And the standard sentence I say is nobody cares who you are until they first understand what problem you solve for them. And that's what I see a lot in sales decks. It talks about us, about our business, our technology, our features, our stuff, right? It's me. And the truth is clients want to hear about them. So how do you do that? Well, you first outline the problem that you're solving. So we found that companies in your industry often will spend an incredible amount of time on hiring, and that leads to really inefficient processes. It leads to hiring the wrong people. Often it's very expensive. This is generally what we've discovered. Then you shift to the solution. Well, we've actually created a technology platform that shortens that process. It makes it much more efficient, and you're able to hire more quality people in less time. And then you move into, and we bring that to life through and such and such. And then you talk about how you actually operate as a company, right? Because once you've created that problem solution connection, right, that fundamental glue at the beginning, then the question in your customer's mind switches from why should I talk to you to so do I believe these guys can deliver what they say they can deliver, right? So that's when they want to know about the details of how you do it and who you are and whether you're credible or not. And the mistake that I see in a lot of sales decks is that flips around, right? So first they talk about themselves, and then if you're lucky, it gets to the problem solution connection. That's what you should definitely avoid in any sort of communication, especially in your sales decks.
Amazing. Zoltan, let's move ahead a bit. Founders often panic when the pipeline dries up. What's your emergency move?
Well, I'd say if you're in a situation where you find that your pipeline is not as robust as you'd hope, the first thing I would do is to revisit your network, right? Your past prospects, your old clients, any sort of network-based things that you can tap into, and see if there are referrals or references that you can tap into that are going to generate some interest. I think that's sort of job number one. Then what I would do is I would do sort of like a sprint, right? So, a lot of sales obviously is the boring day-to-day stuff, and you kind of do it Monday through Friday, and, over time, the benefits grow over time. But sometimes you just got to put like a really focused time, right? So if I'm doing this as a founder, or if I've got a small sales team I'm managing, you put together a sprint saying in the next 10 days, I want people to reach out to 10 new prospects a day with personalized messages. We're going to then publish some LinkedIn posts that drive interest in a landing page, and then we're gonna put a lot of effort into do it. And that does two things. First of all, it focuses your efforts, right? Because it actually says in the next 10 days we will do this. Second of all, you can really track results in a very compact way, and you can see what's working, what's not. I know a lot of sales organizations that run at a professional level do these sprints on a recurring basis, right? It just creates that culture of focus. And then if that sort of doesn't yield the results you want, then maybe it's time to think about reframing your ideal customer, right? So maybe the one that you've identified in the past has evolved. Maybe they're not quite as open to your solution as they were before. So you start looking at the ways to create subsections of that, or to pivot it, and eventually, hopefully, you'll do it in a way that start filling up your pipeline, so you don't have the situation happen too often in the future.
How about pricing? Let's talk about pricing for a second. Like, how do you help startups, stop undervaluing themselves?
Yeah. So I think that I would divide that into two parts, right? One is talk a little bit about the psychology of pricing, and the other is the practical application of it. So, the reason pricing is so different is because, so difficult is because it's some combination of psychology and market, right? So we've all been in a situation, I'm sure, where you've come across a solution that's priced, very low, and you start scratching your head and say, I wonder if it's worth that much. And then you've got the opposite end, where you come across something that's priced extremely high, and you're like, well, is that worth it? Or maybe you say, oh, well, if it's priced so high, then it must be really good, right? So there's a lot of psychology in there that you have to kind of deal with. And so what I often do with my clients is I work with them to do some combination of market research. What are your competitors charging? Looking at basically what they historically have been able to charge, on past deals. And third, going through a little bit of gut check to see what's a reasonable price for this. You have to start with something, right? So it's not going to be, you can do this in a vacuum and you'll come up with something. Obviously, you're going to be able to test it and see what works. When you get to the point of testing it, I would very much encourage founders to focus the process of pricing into 3 tiers. And the reason is that there's a psychology of choice, right? You want to be able to provide enough choice for customers to feel like they have an opportunity to decide between options, but not so many options that they become overwhelmed, right? A confused mind doesn't buy. And so what you want to do is provide 3 options: an entry level, a medium level, and a premium level offer of whatever it is you're offering. And the psychology of it is pricing it in a way that you push interest towards the middle option. We as humans like to find balance in our lives. So there's a very high priority to finding the absolute balance. So most people, about 80 to 85%, will choose the middle option. That should be the ideal balance of value and cost. And then you've got the 2 other packages that are kind of balanced. The entry level should provide a lot of value at, certainly much less value than the middle option for a high price, and the premium should be really all the bells and whistles. And if you do this right and you test it over time, you're going to find that you're going to have a much shorter sales cycle, and you're going to start closing deals much faster at the value that you think is appropriate for the market.
Zoltan, you truly are a treasure trove of insights about sales, and I'm kind of jumping from question to question because I really want to make kind of a masterclass for early stage founders on sales. I wanted to also ask you about cold outreach, because a lot of early stage founders, especially those that maybe don't have the network built yet, don't have this warm intros ready, warm doors kind of open. So cold outreach, love it or hate it. And what's the secret to making it work?
Yeah. So I'm going to be a bit contrarian here because I think there's currently the general feeling is that with AI, there's such an opportunity to focus and to personalize that you can basically get to whoever you need to just by using AI tools. I actually don't prefer cold outreach. I don't believe in it. I specifically don't believe it in high ticket sales, which is my area of focus, because that's built on trust and credibility. And that's something that you build, first of all, over time. And second of all, once you've created some connection to that person so that they're willing to listen. If I want to be a smart ass about it, I can say, cold outreach is sort of like throwing darts while you're blindfolded, right? You might hit a bullseye every once in a while, but it sure as hell isn't repeatable. If you do decide to use cold email, then I would say make sure that whatever message you're sending out there is about the customer's problem and not your product, right? So it should really be something that when they open that email and the first sentence they read should be, okay, I understand. This is the problem I have. I'm looking for a solution, right? Nobody cares, again, who you are until they first understand what problem you solve for them. So that would be the first point. Second, lead with a short message and maybe a question. All right. Don't pitch in the first message, because you're going to find that a lot of people don't want to hear a pitch. They want to, the short message should be something that resonates with them and gets them to want to learn more. And then I think it'd be a good idea to personalize at least one element of it. But I have to be honest with you, I do get cold outreaches where like, hey, I noticed you like fishing. I'd like to talk to you about my HR solution, right? So it's like this complete disconnect. That's clearly something that's been taken. I'm not a big fishing fan, by the way. I'm just making that up. But clearly it's somebody scraped some profile of you and they found out you liked fishing, and then they put that in their message. I don't think those work. But if you can personalize saying, hey, I saw you speak at this conference about such and such a topic. That's interesting because we're figuring out how to solve for that problem right now. Is like maybe a more relevant answer, right? Or you say, hey, I noticed that that we both worked at such and such a company back in the day. I see we both moved on into entrepreneurship. I'm actually working on an interesting product that you might find interesting, right? So you're finding, I call these touch points, where you basically are finding that something that's going to make that connection relevant for that person. And your goal here, obviously, is to get on the phone or get on a video call like this and to have a meaningful conversation, right? It's not to sell something right off the bat, because that's quite unusual, unless you're selling something for 20 euros a month, which is obviously a very immediate sort of decision.
Yeah, so just be human, try to be normal, right?
Yeah, I know. And that's funny you say that, be human. I actually think being human is now becoming more and more valuable in the age of AI, because actually, it's becoming so mechanized, it's so technology driven, the sales process, that I think if you are human, you stick out much more in a good way and much more quickly.
Yeah, because I have a feeling that a lot of people, like when they try to sell, they kind of get into this role and they pretend and they try to play it, and like just be human. I mean, it's like simple to say just be yourself, but kind of have this human touch. Zoltan, what does a winning B2B sales funnel actually look like at the early stage?
Well, if you want to really, really simplify it, there's kind of three stages to a funnel. There's top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, and bottom of the funnel. The top of the funnel is where you're reaching out, you're generating maybe inbound interest, you're generating some sort of initial interest in your offer, and people are saying to themselves, okay, well, this sounds interesting. I wonder what this is, right? Then you jump into the middle of the funnel, where you maybe have a qualification call, you understand your customer's needs, you test to see if that's a good fit with what you're offering. And by the way, there's absolutely nothing wrong if what comes out of that is it's not a good fit. I talk about how the importance of, quality sales is about saying no as much as saying yes, right? It's about having clear distinctions about what is a good fit customer for you and what is not. I'll give you a very specific example. I once had an outreach from a Swedish founder who was selling a SaaS tool for individuals, sort of at this 20 to 30 euro a month price point. And we had this conversation. It became very apparent to me that, what would work for him would be a classic sort of digital marketing, very broad, advertising driven sort of approach to customer acquisition, which is just my expertise, right? I'm focused really on high ticket sales to mid to large customers. And I told him that. I said, look, I think your problem is not one that I'm here to fix. And I recommended he speak to such and such a person. And I think he appreciated that, right? Because it also makes it very clear that you're not there to force somebody to buy something they don't need, to just refer to an earlier point. You're there to solve a person's problem. And if you're not in a good position to solve it, then don't force it. And then once you get through the middle of the funnel, you go to the bottom funnel, which is basically your proposals, your next steps, answering any sort of objections and getting to a yes. And if you're doing this right, what you're actually doing is you're tracking the conversions from one stage to the next. You're getting feedback at each stage. And then you're using that information to fine tune whatever it is you're saying at whatever stage. If you have that top, middle, bottom funnel working relatively well, then you're going to find yourself generating recurring and predictable revenues for your business.
Nice. I like it. I like it a lot. Zoltan, let's get to the fun part already, slowly, of the conversation that we were having. I'm not saying that it hasn't been fun so far.
This is the boring crap. Now let's get to the good stuff.
Yeah. Zoltan, tell me, what's one myth about sales books that's hurting more than helping startups?
Well, this is something I can speak to a lot because effectively what I sell or what I offer to my customers is some form of a playbook, right? I call it a blueprint, but it's effectively kind of a system, right? If we approach it. And so one of the things that I had to learn, as I put together the different pieces of the launch code, right? So a bit backstory, I had been in the corporate world for 20 years, selling big ticket items, closing hundreds of millions of dollars of deals, got sick of that. And I started working then with early stage founders. And as I started working with them, I noticed that there were some incredibly passionate, really, really smart, technically focused people who had this dream of building this product, but they had no idea of how to actually sell it, right? How to get paying customers for it. And then a lot of the things that to me came as second nature because I had been doing it for so many years, I shared with them and they kind of like enjoyed that process, but in some ways they didn't know how to apply it, right? And so what I actually did is I started like literally with a blank sheet of paper and I said, okay, so if I was teaching somebody how to sell from day one, what would that look like? And that's when I started building together the pillars of the launch code, right? So focus your offer and message, to structure your client acquisition, to scale your operations, what are the different modules? There's kind of 3 modules for each. That literally started from a moment of absolute clarity to say, this is what somebody who learns to learn how to sell should understand. But what I did was I included a lot of stuff in there, right? Like a lot. And what I think the biggest mistake that a lot of playbooks have is they make it too complex and too comprehensive from day one. And in reality, there should be something like a minimum viable playbook, right?
Yeah.
And so what I actually did was I started getting rid of a bunch of stuff. And even now I sometimes feel like it's a little bit too much, but I tried to simplify it to the point where really somebody who just is overwhelmed, doesn't understand it, doesn't have the context, just wants something they can apply relatively quickly. That's ultimately what they get with the system. And that I think is something that a good playbook works, which is, by the way, why I position the launch code very much for tech founders who are at early stage of development. It's not for, sales ninjas who've been doing this for 25 years, because a lot of the things in there are going to be something that is second nature to them, but that's fine, right? They're not my ICP. I work with early stage founders. And so I think that's what I would say is important for all of you out there who are potentially looking to put some of the system together, is make it really simple, basic. Don't make it too complex, because it will become very difficult to implement.
So we are kind of getting like back to the beginning of our conversation when I ask you like, why do founders oftentimes overcomplicate sales? Also, books sometimes or oftentimes overcomplicate sales.
Yeah.
Simplicity is the key. I want to play a little game with you at the end of this lovely conversation. It's going to be like kind of rapid fire questions for you. The first one will be, you kind of already answered it. So I could skip that one, but let's go with it. Just to reinforce the the topic cold outreach or warm intro.
Okay. So I say warm intro. I think trust is something that transfers much more effectively and instantly. I think cold outreach is a grind unless you have a really, really strong message and a very, very tight ICP.
Biggest red flag from a client?
We don't have the budget, or we're not sure who's going to be deciding on this, right? So if there's no clear owner and there's no clear budget to buy whatever you're selling, it's very unlikely that there's going to be a deal.
Better founder superpower, listening or storytelling?
I say listening, because I think you earn the right to tell your story first by understanding your customer's story.
Nice. Coffee meeting or Zoom pitch?
Well, Zoom pitches are faster. They're much more focused. They're easier to schedule. I think coffees are for when you want to deepen relationships at a later stage, either of the sales process or as you're nurturing the relationship.
Nice. Most painful sales email opener?
Something along those lines. I just wanted to reach out and introduce myself. ... I think that screams delete me. Again, nobody cares who you are, especially if there's no reference. Say, hey, Bill Jones and I were speaking the other day, and he suggested I reach out to you. Again, that's very different. But if it's just a cold outreach or without really context, they're just not going to be interested because they don't really care who you are.
Okay, Zoltan. So now it's a tricky one. One book every founder should read.
Well, obviously, I should answer the launch code, right? Because it's something come out just 2 months ago. It's available on Amazon for anybody who wants to tap into the system and read the stories that bring the system to life. But it's, in all seriousness, I think the book that I would recommend everybody should read is called The One Thing. It's by a guy named Gary Keller. It's all about the power of focus and how by focusing on just one thing can really accelerate your growth very, very quickly.
Amazing. I love it. Last one. Describe launch code in one sentence.
Okay. So you're putting me on the test here, right?
Yes, sir.
So launch code is a B2B sales blueprint that helps tech founders, often ones that are struggling with sales, to win more high-ticket clients and to grow their revenue faster. And it does it by teaching them how to focus, structure, and scale their sales and marketing activities.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Zoltan, for taking the time, everybody. Give it up for Zoltan Vardy.
Thank you very much.
Please go check Launch Code, the book that recently launched.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And Marcin, if I could make an offer to your audience, just because it's a great opportunity for them to learn more.
Let's do it.
So first of all, I'm the only Zoltan Vardy on LinkedIn. So if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'll be easy to find. Second, for those of you who maybe got a bit of an inkling to learn more about the Launch Code book, just go to my website, zoltanvardy.com/book. So zoltanvardy.com/book. You can go on there. You'll get some information about it. You can actually also sign up to receive the first chapter of the book for free. And then you can decide later if you want to purchase it on Amazon, either in ebook format or printed, and soon in audio format as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Zoltan. I think people will love it. I love the conversation. Hope you had fun as well. And I hope to see you soon in person.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Ciao.